Jerry Sandusky. He was the coach that did a lot of things with kids and work with kids, and everybody had this image that he was this great guy.
Yeah.
When it turns out the entire time he had been molesting kids.
It's pretty horrific, isn't it?
Yeah, it's horrific, but that's often the role they play. The role they play as
they have to get themselves
predator,
into a mission
yes.
where they're close to...
Yes, which is like Boy Scout masters and priests.
Which is, it's a terrible thing because something like the Scouts, which is very good for kids, go and play together and learn those things and those skills. It's a great organization, and yet that's absolutely fucking ruined it. That's the first thing you think of now when you think of the Scouts.
Well, the Catholic Church is the greatest example of that, right? I mean, you cannot say Catholic priest without someone thinking pedophile. There's no other occupation on earth that has such a connection to pedophilia.
Yeah. Hey, so someone was talking to me about the history of the Catholic Church and what happened, and the idea of the thing that turned the Catholic Church bad was the plague.
Really?
So the plague hit in the Middle Ages. And before then, the priest was the smartest guy you'd ever met. The smartest guy in the town became
could read
this
Latin.
Guy could read. This guy can read.
Right.
There's just shapes on a page to us. But had access to books, was reading, was the most erudite, brilliant guy. The bishop was even smarter than that. The Pope was a genius. Great. So the plague happens, and the plague wipes out, I think it's a third of the European population, but it might have been more than that. And it wiped out a third of regular people, but it wiped out 90% of priests because priests had to give last rites. Oh. So they were around the plague more than regular people. I need the last rites. I'm dying. Okay, then he dies.
Right.
So the barrier to entry for getting into the priesthood went from you got to be great to you seem to have all your own teeth and you can string a sentence together. You'll be great. So all of that stuff that comes after, downstream of that, like the plenary indulgences, this thing where you could buy your way into heaven in the Middle Ages. You could sort of pay someone to go, you can make sure I'm okay when I get there, though. That kind of nonsense came along afterwards when it had all kind of come
corruption.
down.
Yeah.
The corruption and the...
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had heard that it was connected to celibacy, and that initially there was no celibacy clause. They weren't.
No,
they weren't
that came in the Middle Ages. So it was that thing of they wanted to be more like Christ. So they who was celibate, and so they went, well, I'm going to be, one priest said, well, I'm going to be more like him, live like Christ. I'm going to be celibate, not have a wife. And then that kind of took off as an idea.
That's interesting because what I had heard was that
in the Anglican
they
Church.
were banging all the women because the priests were rock stars. I mean, if you have a community where the priest is literally connected to God and he's a biological male and he's horny, and these women worship them and came
also,
to them for
it's the original show business.
Yes,
I mean, if we were who we are in the 13th century, 100% priests
or jesters.
Sorry, I can get up in front of these people and talk to them for an hour a week.
Right.
Done.
Right.
Yes, put me down for one of those.
Right. And they'd seek guidance from you. You'd get all these accolades. And apparently they were allowed to have sex with women, and they were fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Just like rock stars, because they were probably the most popular people in the town.
The other thing that that's very interesting. The other thing that ties it to, there's often been, and it's a very unpleasant thing, but there's often been a conflation between homosexuality and pedophilia, which is... So it's just fucking nonsense.
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense, but it keeps on kind of rearing its head in a weird way. But there is something with the Catholic Church where it's hard to remember how vilified gay guys were a generation ago, let alone 2 generations ago.
Yeah, well, very recently, in the 90s.
It's crazy, but it's true. So there's a weird thing where, okay, so let's say you're a gay guy in, I don't know, 1890. You knew you were gay when you were 14 or whatever. Like everyone else is getting married and going off, and you go, I'm a gay guy. The priesthood was a smart move because you went, well, I don't have to get married. And I know I'm not about that, so I'll join the priesthood. So you join the priesthood. You were a gay guy. There were other gay guys that had the idea. Great.
Right.
Now, here's the weird thing. Pedophilia was the same level sin in the eyes of the church at that level. So one covered for the other. It was all, you were all damned and going to hell. It was all terrible, which is obviously some fucking nonsense. But yeah.